Right.
Looks like Andrew's in the waiting room.
All right. So yeah, folks. All right, everyone. We are welcome to the first 100 days of virtual town hall. While folks begin joining today's live stream, please be sure to share where you're joining from in the chat, and we'll be getting started very shortly. So excited to have this necessary conversation as we commemorate the first 100 days of the 47th presidential administration. So much has taken place over the last 3 months, and we're so excited to have this conversation with you and legal and policy experts from across industries. All right, so we've got some initial comments. We've got Tiffany joining from Chicago. Angie has joined the chat. Thank you all for being punctual, but we know it's a sunny day, depending on where you are. If you're like me joining from DC, it's a sunny day. So I appreciate you all for taking time out to join the conversation, but hopefully you can do so from outside and getting some fresh air while we have this conversation. Looks like Angie's joining from Centerville, Maryland. Love to see it. Aja is joining from Bethesda. Yes. Okay. Tiffany wants us to send her some sun. We're sending you sun from the East Coast. All right, the time is 6:03, so we're going to give folks a couple more minutes, then we're going to jump into today's agenda. We got folks joining from the Big Apple in New York. Hey, Jeremy. Alethea from Washington. Brent is coming in from Atlanta. Love to see it. Love to see it. All right. And so as you all can see, up above my head, you should be able to see the firm's LinkedIn, Instagram, and website. Please, if you haven't already, make sure to follow us on all these various platforms. Facebook, you can also find us at Amber Smith Law. And then, of course, our website, subscribe to our email so you can be in the know as we send out takeaways from today. But also, we want to be sure that we can stay in touch in general. Perfect. We got folks joining in from LA. Hey, Jacqueline. Najwa from DC. We got a great group of folks. So we're excited to hear your questions and your concerns from all across the country. All right, because this is truly a global conversation, as you will soon learn. But we definitely are going to be focused on some domestic issues to begin. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. We're going to count us down to that. Let's see, we're going to go ahead and count us down 30 seconds until 6:05 so we can go ahead and jump into the agenda. Thank you. All right, folks. Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, if you're just hopping on, my name is Attorney Amber C. Smith. I'm the founder of the Law Office of Amber C. Smith, the host of tonight's virtual town hall. But this is truly an opportunity to have a nonpartisan, interactive conversation unpacking the first 100 days of the 47th presidential administration, but also an opportunity to plan ahead for the future in business, law, and politics. All right. So just a few preliminary matters before we get started. When we think about the first 100 days, there's so many things to consider. But before we delve into tonight's discussion, a brief but important note: the information shared during tonight's town hall is not to be misconstrued as legal advice. Our goal, myself and my fellow speakers, is simply to provide you with accurate, actionable information to help you navigate the current landscape with clarity, strategy, and optimism. All right, so let's set the stage. All right. So yesterday, President Donald Trump hosted a rally in Macomb, Michigan, right outside of Detroit, celebrating his first 100 days back in office. But as we gather here today, we must ask, is this truly a moment for celebration? And if so, for whom? Since returning to the White House, President Trump has issued at least 139 executive orders. On his first day alone, he signed 26 orders, including pardoning more than 1,500 individuals convicted in connection with the January 6th Capitol riot. He withdrew from the World Health Organization and even renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. His executive actions have focused heavily on immigration, border control, energy, policy, and trade. Some of the most controversial orders have included pardoning of folks who have been involved in drug trafficking and money laundering, like the founder of a dark web marketplace, the Silk Road, but also folks involved in the digital asset space, like Arthur Hayes, the first Black crypto billionaire. And as you can see from our slate of speakers, we're going to even be talking about digital asset governance in this era. And so domestically, right, we're seeing that the federal workforce has experienced significant upheaval. According to CNN, over 121,000 federal employees have been dismissed. The USAID, the agency responsible for administering civilian foreign aid, has been nearly dismantled. And economically, tariffs of at least 10% have been imposed on all foreign goods, with tariffs on Chinese imports reaching as high as 145%. Now, of course, there have been exclusions for certain items we rely on, like smartphones, but this has effectively put in place a bit of an embargo with China. And the financial markets have responded. Since November, we see that all U.S. indices have declined, and even more so since January. Right? Internationally, we see a situation that's equally concerning with ongoing casualties in the Middle East. And as you'll see on screen, there are some illustrations of what is taking place, particularly in Gaza. We're also seeing increased U.S. strikes in Yemen. And in all of this, right, is creating an image of confusion and chaos. But there's also a lot that maybe we aren't necessarily having conversations about. And that's what we want to focus on today, while also addressing some of these matters. I think it's also important to note that there have been many promises that were made by the president coming into this administration. And according to Al Jazeera, who has put together some of these graphics on the screen, right, we can see that the jury is still out on whether or not these promises have been kept. But ultimately, the question is not whether the promises have been kept or broken, but what is the true impact on American citizens and those we engage with. And so I think it's also worth noting that, you know, as I'll discuss with our speakers today, it's no coincidence that the speakers I've invited here all happen to be Black attorneys. And while we are a part of an industry diverse in its own right, Black attorneys only make up 5% of the legal profession. And so, to be clear, this is not necessarily an accurate reflection, but it's important to recognize that there are folks like us who understand that this is a moment for us to rise to the occasion, to have this conversation, to empower both our colleagues and our clients. And so that is truly, truly the goal of tonight's conversation. And so ultimately, it is just that, a discussion and a call to action. We're here to provide you with the tools, knowledge, and perspective needed to continue navigating these challenging times, recognizing that there will still be conversations left to be had. And so I'm excited to engage with the questions that you all have for our guests, for myself, and that hopefully you walk away feeling inspired to continue to be creative and strategic as you navigate life and business under this new administration. All right. And so with that said, I wanted to make sure that we have an idea of the agenda for tonight's event. And so, again, as you can tell, those would have amounted to my opening remarks. And so the remainder of this town hall is really going to be just that. If you're familiar in a political realm, typically a town hall will involve various presenters and speakers who will share certain insights, and then the audience will have an opportunity to engage with that content. And so the topics that we're going to be addressing range from this overarching constitutional crisis, which really can be broken down into an attack on the rule of law, the attack on civil and human rights, but also the status of employment law and employee rights. We're seeing so much, not only in the federal government, but across the private sector as a result of what's happening politically. And so we're going to talk to experts with experience in that realm. We're also going to talk about the attack on DEI, which we know intersects with the impact that the current policy landscape is having on employees, but also employers, and how they're able to interact with their with the members of their organization. But then we're also going to look ahead, right? As we talk about what's happening and the attack on certain more long-standing areas of law, there's also emerging industries and areas of law that this administration has taken particular interest in. And so we want to explore what opportunities our guests have already been able to seize upon and what they see their clients and their colleagues seizing upon. And so that might involve a larger conversation around just ownership, right? And the future of capital formation, whether that's through private equity and venture capital, or other means of securing the resources we need to own and operate sustainable businesses. And then we're going to move into some of those more emerging industries like AI, particularly looking at its intersection with IP. As a business and IP attorney, you can imagine it is always my intention to make sure that my clients are aware of what's happening as it relates to the assets that they are developing and hopefully able to monetize. And so we're going to have that conversation. And then we're also going to end with a conversation about digital asset governance and the future of money. When we think of crypto and the fact that this administration has consolidated the governance of AI and crypto, this is not a coincidence. And so we really want to have that conversation. So with that said, all right. Okay, so at this time, I am going to go ahead and bring to the stage Attorney Keisha A. Brown, my fellow Hoya lawyer. For those who don't know, that is a term of endearment for lawyers who attended the Georgetown University Law Center. And actually, there's a couple of us here tonight, as we will discuss. But Keisha is the founder and CEO of Justice Connection, your top choice for connecting with Black lawyers. She has created this digital platform, and I'm so excited to have her talk more about this, but also her background as a civil rights attorney. It's so timely. And so as we start with some of these macro issues, right, discussing the attack on the rule of law, I would love to have her insight. And then we're going to bring up our other guest speakers to weigh in, because as you can imagine, as members of this profession, it's so important that we are having these conversations. Okay. Let's see. Keisha.
Hello.
Hey, Keisha. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Excited for tonight's town hall?
Yes, absolutely. It's been a long time coming. I mean, three months, going on 3 months. It's felt probably a little bit more like 3 years these days. So, it's great to see you in good spirits. But what have the last 3 months been for you, especially with Justice Connection? And tell us a little bit more about what led to you starting that organization.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. So my name is Keisha Brown, and I'm a lawyer, but I really have, for me, Amber, from the minute I started law school, I had folks, and I'm sure you can relate, people who are like, hey, do you know somebody who does bankruptcy or child support or business or trademarks? And I would go through my little phone and email and try to connect people. And then I was just like, we need our own network as Black people, right? As Black attorneys. And I've embarked to build that network that I wish existed. And that's what Justice Connection is, right? So we're actually gearing up to launch nationally. So for all of those folks who don't live in the DMV right now, we are so excited to go national, and we are so pleased to be able to do it at a time when I believe our people need us most, right? This country has always treated us as the stepsister, if you will, at best. And we've always needed legal support. We don't always have legal support. We don't always know where to go. We don't even know oftentimes that our challenge has a legal solution. But I'm so glad that you've gathered so many of your attorney friends to be really present, because half of the battle is really just showing up and being present for our people. And that's what I do, at Justice Connection. And I'm so excited to do here tonight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think we can all relate, right, to having to refer our friends. The legal profession is very much a if you know kind of environment, right? And if you know one attorney, you typically can connect with others. But still, you can imagine with limited bandwidth, it's so important to have platforms like yours. So on behalf of the clients, right, that rely on Justice Connection to connect with attorneys, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yes, I appreciate that.
No, absolutely. And so we want to go ahead and just kind of jump into some questions that essentially every speaker is going to be talking about. But of course, right now we're talking about this overarching idea of the attack on the rule of law. And of course, in working with attorneys and helping to bridge the gap between the clients that specifically are seeking out Black attorneys, what does this attack look like for you? And of course, together we can dive into maybe some specific, executive orders, things of that nature that you might feel really speak to this attack. But what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, I'll tell you, for me, it is eyes on the prize. What is happening in this first 90 days, 100 days has not changed my focus, right? And my mission to empower Black people in the law. My eyes are on Black liberation all day, every day, right? And for me, I'm excited because other people, I feel like, are also, a lot of people are really leaning into, how do we create our own? How do we make sure that we are supporting our own? How do we make sure that I'm connected to my own? And so having lawyers, right, is a part of that. We talk about, making sure we spend money in the Black community at a Black business. Black lawyers are businesses too, right? They are the type that I want every Black person to have on speed dial, a Black lawyer. Because it's not if, but when that sugar honey iced tea hits the fan, that we need to be able to have the right resources have our back. Because right now, oftentimes we're walking outside hoping that nothing goes wrong. Like, okay, I don't want to get pulled over. I don't want them tripping on my job. I don't need no heat, no smoke today. I just want to do my thing, right? And the reality is, as a Black person in this country, it's coming at us every which way. And oftentimes we're just navigating it on our own, and we don't have to. We truly don't have to. And a big part of that is Black lawyers as well, stepping up and stepping out. So when we look at what's happened, over these last 100 days, I look at it as, America doing its thing. America's always done its thing. It's always been doing its thing. And it has never put Black people at the heart of what's right and what is best, right? And so we've always had to fend for ourselves. In this situation, I hope that not only are we fending for ourselves, but we're building for ourselves, right? In a way that is creating infrastructure that is best built by us and for us, so that we not only sustain whatever the next 100 days have, but the next 100 years, because we have everything that we need.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And maybe let's speak to that, right? Because when we talk about right now, buzzwords like the constitutional crisis that we're in the midst of and the attack on the rule of law, of course, we saw inklings of this not only in Trump's first administration, right? Whether that was his commitment to stacking the federal courts, right, with folks that were sympathetic to both his and Republican perspectives, or particularly MAGA perspectives, right? But then we also see this commitment to the use of executive orders, right, which do have the force of law, but override or are able to circumvent congressional approval. So, maybe throughout history, right? You have a background in civil rights law. When else have we seen someone maybe behave in this way? And if we haven't, right, maybe what aspect of history is this an outgrowth of, or maybe a resurgence of, in your opinion?
That is a good combo question, right? Like, what is going on, right? You basically were like, what is going on? What are we doing here? And I will say that the tactics of hitting from all corners and all sides, right, is creating this intentional chaos that we all feel. And I'll say to those who are watching, lawyers are in real time figuring it out as well. Right? Yeah. They truly are. And it's also why this administration has been keen on attacking law firms directly, right? So that the industry itself, the legal professionals, the attorneys, are not solely focused on looking outward. They are also now looking inward, right? How are we protecting, to a certain degree, the boundaries that have always existed, right? And so we know Shakespeare, one of his most famous plays, right? What does he say first when they're about to do anarchy? Kill the lawyers, right? So by distracting the lawyers, and when I say distracting the lawyers, for those who don't know, this administration has targeted a number of large law firms around the country and basically said a number of things. One, who you can hire. Don't do DEI. You've got to do work for me, right? I'm going to blackball you from being able to have national security clearances, which means you can't engage in certain levels of business for your clients, and has put their own clients in a tailspin to say, can you best represent me and my interests of the business? And so what a number of the large law firms have started to do is cave, if you will, and say, hey, we're going to offer this administration hundreds of millions of dollars worth of pro bono legal services, right? Free legal services. And for those of you who are out there who aren't lawyers, you're like, well, wait a second, I'm trying to get some pro bono myself. I didn't know they was passing out pro bono hours, right, at large law firms, which they don't. They don't. So this is unprecedented in some ways, where we have this trickle effect, and we have large and small law firms across the country who are looking at, we don't want to be next. So how do we avoid getting a light shone down on us, shine down, one of those two words, right, on us. And so that's affecting not only what they do, but then also how they advise their clients, right? And so, when I speak to, I'm getting a lot of requests, especially, of course, as you can imagine, for employment support, right? Businesses who need contract support, as people are trying to navigate this on an individual level, let alone on an institutional level, around sort of what they can and can't do. And so my advice to everybody is lawyer up, right? Lawyer up. Don't wait until they come for you. Don't wait until they say, oh, we're not going to honor our contract because we can't do DEI contracts anymore. But you already got the ink with their John Hancock on it. You need to be able to connect with a legal eagle who is customizing their legal advice to you and your situation, so that you are prepared for what you need to know in order to best protect your business, to protect your family, to protect your interests, your institutions, your civic organizations, your sororities, your fraternities, the whole gamut. And so, this is a time, really, Amber, I think, for us not to scatter, if you will, and hide, but to really come together really strong.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great segue, because we've got some of our other guests backstage right now, and I'd love to bring them up to kind of weigh in on what they're seeing. I think it's also important to note, right, many of us here have our own firms. And while we may not have been the large multi-billion-dollar and international firms that have been named in executive orders, we either work with them, used to work for them, right? A lot of us are former big law attorneys. And, I think it's important to acknowledge, these are our colleagues, right, who are making these decisions, whether quote unquote to capitulate or to cave in. But we're also seeing folks create organizations like Big Law Firm Partners United and General Counsels United, right? Stand up, mount cases, challenge these executive orders and some of the things that are doing. I visited Perkins Coie, which is one of the largest firms that is also being, called to the table in this moment and has chosen to push back. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull some folks up to the stage and get them to weigh in. And of course, each of them has their own area of expertise that intersects with all of what we're gonna be talking about today. So we'll be seeing each other. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up Chris, Andrew, and Denzel are here, and Tanisha. Let's see. All right, and so if you have reviewed the description of today's event, then you know that Chris is the founder of Technology Innovation Law Group, as well as IP Rights for All, which is all about democratizing access to IP. Andrew is a phenomenal civil rights attorney and managing partner of District Legal Group alongside Deanna Maria Lewis, who's going to be joining us today. Denzel is the founder of Cadet Legal, an amazing firm helping lower to middle market companies really grow and sustain phenomenal businesses. And Tanisha is our resident DEI expert and civil rights attorney as well. So, hey folks, how's it going?
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
I love it. I love it. Now, Tanisha, I got to shout out Tanisha because she is joining us from the UK. So she is past her bedtime to be a part of this conversation. I thank her so much. She's also a classmate of mine. Her and I met at Georgetown back in the day. And so I'm so grateful to have her part of this conversation. But folks, let's weigh in. And now I will say we've got a couple comments. All right, we got Tiffany saying that she has so many of her nonprofit organization clients anxious about their federal funding because of DEI, right? Because of this administration's response to DEI, which again kind of speaks to this overall attack on laws, right, that have been in place. DEI has been legal up until certain executive orders were passed. And so I know, Tanisha, that you can weigh in on this, but in general, right, can we just kind of weigh in on this conversation about why we're attacking, why we're seeing this attack on our colleagues, and what is our role in this moment?
Of course. Let me first just start off by saying it's truly an honor to be in this space with such an incredible and dope panel, especially in the age of misinformation and disinformation. We need spaces like this that are rooted in facts, that are committed to truth and grounded in collective power. So shout out to you, Ambur, Hoya Lawyer in the building as well. So I always begin these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, grounding us in courage, because courage is what is required right now. Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the decision that something else is more important. And so to me, that something else is justice and community and refusing to look away. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I get the question like, is it allowed anymore? And I always say this, the short answer is that DEI is in and of itself not illegal. What is illegal is discrimination. And so that is the piece that we have to really censor when we're having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I mean, I can first start off by just talking about DEI. I think oftentimes when we hear that word or hear that phrase, we think race and gender, right? And that's because we have powers that have pushed this idea that DEI is just about Black and brown folks, like getting these advantages, but that's not true. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is for people who have historically been marginalized and left out of access. And specifically, what's most important about that is that they're left out because of state-sanctioned policies. And so when we talk about state-sanctioned policies, these are policies that are sanctioned by the federal government, city governments, state governments. I'm from the beautiful yet tumultuous state of Mississippi, and we had Jim Crow laws in the South which legally mandated racial segregation. We had redlining. Tiffany's from Chicago. We had redlining, which was a government sanctioned programming that essentially created these racially segregated maps. We had people with disabilities who were not allowed to go to school or to work, and that was legal. And so these state sanctioned policies have created disparities for groups of people. And so what diversity, equity, and inclusion does essentially is say, hey, we recognize that there were state sanctioned policies that created a disadvantage. So now what we have to do is work to fix that disadvantage. And we have some key laws that allow that to happen that I want to make sure people ground themselves in.
And
we have Go ahead.
Tisha, really quickly, I want to interject because I want to give you the full stage to talk about DEI, right? And I know we're ready to get off the races, but I wanted to talk specifically about why we think that law firms are being targeted for that, and for everyone else to also be able to weigh in and see, right, why are our colleagues being targeted in this way, in this moment, right? So maybe expounding upon this idea that, you know, this is an opportunity to create confusion, right? To disorient them so that they're not able to defend the clients that need the support the most. So I would love to hear kind of your take on that. And then, of course, the same from the gentleman that joined us.
Yeah, you just said it. I mean, that's essentially confusion, fear, power, control, and creating this mass chaos to ensure that we feel like we don't have the tools that we need to be able to combat some of this misinformation, is what I call it, and disinformation that's happening. I spoke with someone who wants to be an attorney, and she was like, I don't even know if I want to do it anymore. Like, they're being attacked. And I was like, no, yeah, we need you. Attorneys and the rule of law and fact and our court systems are still here, and they're going to be. And so we have to make sure that we are showing up in those spaces. So, all right, I'm done talking now. I'll toss it over.
Oh, you're coming back. You definitely coming back.
I'll be ready.
Make sure. Let's see. Andrew, jump in here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Attorney Smith, for having me on this panel, and also Attorney Williams. I don't know how you're up right now. I don't even know what time it is over in England. It's probably like 5 a.m. or something, 6 a.m. or something like that. So I appreciate you being here, Keisha, always supporting the community. And these are the types of things that, for me, when we talk about DEI, we miss the fact that what we've been doing over the past 30 years is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't need anybody to tell us that that's necessary, right? We've been doing this as a culture over the past 40 years, where we're not only building our own, but we're building our own, and we also are bringing in other races. We're bringing in people of Hispanic descent, people of Asian descent, of Indian descent. Think about going back to 9/11, where post 9/11, anyone that looked or even appeared to be of Muslim descent was considered untouchable. And it all goes back to this notion of what's the common denominator here, right? White privilege. And whenever we've seen white privilege attacked over the decades, there's always a drastic measure to try to overcorrect for that. And I think what we saw that has led to this rule of law and these law firms being attacked is we saw a overzealous administration that was trying to correct or trying to reverse a lot of policies that not only the Biden administration enacted, but also the Obama administration before that, all within 100-day period. I mean, they're going back and challenging things that were happening in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, what sense is this making to us, except the fact that they want to make sure that not only is white privilege intact, but also, and when I say white privilege, I don't mean literally like white man privilege, but there's a certain privilege that you walk around with, not only when you're in a certain social economic class, but also when you're look of a certain ethnicity, that regardless of if you're Puerto Rican and you look like you're European descent, or you're coming from South America and looking from European descent, that there's always been, over the centuries, always been this appearance of hierarchy. So when you're talking about DEI was based in trying to make that an equal playing field. And because it was working so well, we had so many people in such high places, and we still do today, they wanted to try to even the playing field back on their end, because they felt like they were slipping in that power.
I love that take. Denzel, Chris, what do you think? Is this just an opportunity to overcorrect for some of the different things, exerting that power to do that? Or is there something else maybe underlying this attack on the rule of law?
Yeah. Well, one, thanks for having me, Amber. Very excited to participate and really to learn from the rest of my esteemed panelists. For me, my perspective may be a little different than others in that this quote unquote attack on DEI, I won't say that I'm unbothered, but it doesn't surprise me at all. I was not surprised when Trump got elected the first time. I've lived in this country my whole life, and so I have a saying that I tell my clients, which is usually talking about the other side, but that you can surprise me, but you can't surprise me, but you can disappoint me. And that's kind of how I feel about America. I think it's a place of great opportunity. I say this as first generation, something maybe in the form of privilege that I do have is being the son of a Haitian immigrant. And so my father came to this country seeing the opportunity despite the challenges. And I acknowledge that privilege because it's something that throughout my academic and professional career, I've kind of seen this dynamic sometimes between quote unquote, first generation, whether it's Caribbean immigrant or, West African immigrant communities that, I'm part of. But also, I was raised in the United States. I'm a New Yorker. I was born in Philly, grew up in New York. I lived down south for a while. I am Black American. I am also regular Black, quote unquote, regular Black. And so for me, this is not a new thing, but I would just say, yes, I am alarmed and concerned about a lot of things that are going on. But I'm not surprised at all because, this is how America has always been. And I say this as someone, yes, I'm a Black American. I'm also a Haitian American. This is the same guy who thinks that I eat cats and dogs. So I have no love lost for this administration. But with that said, when we're talking about DEI, it's just a label that they've decided now that they want to demonize this label. And the thing is, to the points of the brother and sisters on the call right now, they can't stop DEI because we're doing it right now. I say this as someone who, yes, I'm from the people that eat cats and dogs. I'm also, by the way, I started off my career at Debevoise and Plimpton, which is one of the law firms that's being targeted by Trump right now. And, I have a lot of love for Debevoise. It's where I started my career, learning how to help clients acquire, accumulate, and really protect assets. And what I really want to talk about today, because I see even here as we have these attacks on us, there's opportunity for us. But just kind of high level, when we talk about DEI, I'm not concerned and I'm not scared because, America has been trying to do that to us in various versions of us. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation to me just shows they can't stop DEI. This is DEI. And the last thing I'll say is, yes, it is important that on this call you have attorneys because yes, we are, and I'm a business attorney. I'm about, closing deals. I'm not into litigation at all, though I've had to now dip my toe in litigation for some of my asset manager clients who are being attacked kind of along these lines too, right? So this attack on DEI does affect all of us. But just to wrap it up, what I would say is I'm encouraged by everyone on this call because, as attorneys and as, a lot of us actually are business owners. I'm from, one of those big firms that likely will make a deal. But the thing is, they can't stop us from doing DEI. And that includes this conversation and running our own businesses. And so what I really want to talk about is the opportunity for us as we own assets and we own and operate our own businesses, that they can't stop us with DEI.
Absolutely. And super excited to dive into that. But we, of course, we got to make sure we're unpacking some of these things that are at the forefront of folks' mind and maybe are preventing them, right, from thinking strategically and optimistically. So thank you for foreshadowing that part of the conversation, Denzel. Chris, did you want to add anything about the attack on the rule of law, on DEI at this stage, particularly targeting law firms?
Certainly, and briefly, and appreciate the opportunity to share with the audience and with the panel. I look at it as a slippery slope to the failure of the American experience, experiment based on arbitrary and capricious abusive language. To echo what Attorney Tiffany said, the phrase diversity, equity, inclusion are lawful. In fact, they're in America's best interest, that we bring all the people together for a common goal to make America successful. I recently had a debate with a gentleman who leads an organization that changed the name of their diversity and inclusion precept to like access and engagement. And I was working with him, so I resigned, and we had an opportunity to discuss why did I resign. And I basically explained, I support lawful symbolism and lawful substance. You changed the name, but you kept the substance the same. The symbolism was lawful. There was no reason to change it other than we have a new administration. So I could not be comfortable leading an area that was, in essence, falsely changed because of some arbitrary and capricious language. Because if you do that, you end up with something, I think in the Middle East, they have a saying where it's the nose of the camel. When you see the nose of the camel underneath the tent, if you don't take care of it right then, you turn your back, the next thing you know, the whole camel's in the tent with you. And that's a lot bigger problem to deal with. So I think this is a slippery slope, and I commend the team. Support your conscience, and your conscience should be prevent this from happening now. And that saves us a lot of time and trouble later.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate that. Thank you all so much. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to allow Keisha to kind of tie up this portion. I'm going to go back to just our screen, and then I'm going to pull you all back kind of one by one. Okay. Again, kind of drawing back on that. Let's see. On that agenda that I shared with everyone. So I love this. So we've got some themes here, right? I think we could really summarize that in saying, one, we all have to be prepared to be a part of some good trouble, right? To quote the late, great John Lewis, voting rights hero, if you will, and former congressman. And, you know, it looks like that's what we're all doing, right, to some extent. But of course, those firms that are actually out here, you know, mounting claims against this administration and defending themselves. But I will say, Keisha, you and I actually started this conversation before the idea for the town hall, because you are actually a member of a church in DC who used the law to defend themselves, specifically against the far right group, the Proud Boys. And as a result of that litigation, they were able to claim ownership of their trademark, right? And so, you know, just speak to what it means to come from that type of a community, and maybe what are some lessons we could learn from not only just that incident, but everything we've talked about, and maybe just to kind of put a bow, you know, what are some things that are giving you hope in this moment, even as it relates to the attack on the rule of law and DEI? And I know I gave you another compound question. I gave you another compound question.
You really did. You really did. I'll start, and I got to write like part of it down. But I will start with you know, about my church. So I attend Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C. It's known as the sort of the flag, the cathedral of the AME denomination. And the Proud Boys came and they vandalized our property. Right, we have a large Black Lives Matter sign that came on our property, vandalized our property, and they thought, you know, this is what we do, right? We destroy and we do what we do, and you know, the church was able to say, "Not today, Satan, not today," right, and be able to take them to court and say, and I think one of the most, you know, so the whole process is powerful. One, I want to note that this took years. Right. So sometimes we talk about, you know, we want that justice, but the arc of justice sometimes is long. Right. So it took years to do. And the Proud Boys lost in their battle. And the court said, OK, you owe the church. I find that you did do this to the church and you owe the church. So then the church came back with their legal counsel. The church had lawyers. Right. And said, in order to collect on the $2.8 million that the judge said the Proud Boys owed the church, in exchange, the judge said, yes, you can have their intellectual property, their IP, right? You can own their trademark, right? So they got a little symbol. You can own Proud Boys. So they are no longer able to use their own symbols without paying us. We can, right? And so I want that to be a symbol of hope for folks, but also a reminder that this ain't new to us. We always been fighting. We've always been doing the 1-2 punch and coming back in ways more powerful than before. And, as I've been doing research and reading, some of the things that I love learning about is even in the midst of Black farmers losing land, we fought for land and we have won, right? Even in the midst of coming to the country as enslaved Africans who were enslaved, we fought for our freedoms in the court, not having lawyers. Sometimes we went on our own and fought and won for our freedom. We won for our land. We won for our housing. We won to get our children. We won to get education for this entire country, right? So we have always used the courts, the rule of law, the legal strategies have always been critical to how we have combated oppression in this country. And now is no different. So whether you are doing it in your own personal capacity, because justice is personal and universal. That's what I think. It's personal in the sense that justice is very much about your life and how it shows up, whether it's on the job, whether it's getting in an accident and deserving to have 66% of your settlement be given to you. I've seen too many Black people lose out on settlement money because they didn't know they were supposed to get this percentage and the lawyer get that. And they're dealing with lawyers who were taking more than they were supposed to. So justice can be so personal at times, and now is no different. And we also see justice in a very universal way, right? Where as a community, we feel the hit. And so whether it is in our individual capacities or whether it's in our sororities or our civic organizations, or whether it's just me, you, and three of us, where two or more are gathered and we come together and decide that we're going to do more, we can do so, I think, in the collective, utilizing lawyers and the law to defend us, to protect us, to represent us, to advocate for us, right? That is the natural posture of Black lawyers. And so if you're a Black lawyer, now is our time, right, to be here for our people. I'll slip in, Amber, if I may, that Justice Connection, we're going national this summer. And so I welcome you to definitely check us out. We are excited to build the ranks. We have been operating as the first Black attorney referral platform in the country. And now that we're going national this summer, it is time for us to be able to not only be more visible and accessible to our people, but also get the recognition that we deserve and need in order to grow our practices. Because I tell you, when Black lawyers are more successful, when we have more access to supporting and serving our people benefit. All right. So if you're out there, connect, pay, and support Black lawyers in whatever capacity you can, because we are part of the gateway to justice for Black people. And so I'll leave on my, don't get me started, because this is my jam, girl. This is where I really, I feel really passionate about this, because we deserve it. We deserve it as a people.
It's so important. It's so important. Thank you so much, Keisha. As you can imagine, we could talk for 2 hours about all these things, right? But tonight is really just about being able to have some actionable conversations, right, within the time frame that we have. And I see our other speakers have joined us. Professor Tanya Evans, Deanna's here. And so I'm super excited to actually bring up some Justice Connection attorneys, Deanna, and then I'll probably bring up Andrew as well, her law firm partner, to chat. But I think this is a great time to kind of segue into, right, we're talking about this attack on the rule of law, but of course we're also seeing in terms of the way in which federal employees have been disproportionately impacted by this, right? Not just federal employees that are lawyers, right, but across the board, and how that intersects with employment law, civil rights law. So with that said, thank you so much, Keisha. Please stick around. Again, folks are still asking questions in the chat, and I would love for us all to maybe be able to come back together towards the end of today. But I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the stage, all right? And then we're going to bring someone else.
Thanks so much. You got some heavy hitters on here, so everybody's in good hands.
Thank you so much. All right, perfect. So with that said, again, so Andrew's already been on stage. Deanna's here. Deanna, I would love to bring you up because I think right now I know we've got a mixed group of folks, and of course today's program is really targeting innovators, lawyers in particular. Of course, just by virtue of who is joining us today, but really it's about folks across industry, some of which are still employed, right? So we're going to definitely speak to those business owners, but I wanted to bring Deanna up to kind of talk about what she's seeing from an employment law perspective. We talked about the attack on DEI. I'm going to bring Tanisha back up to speak to that, but I wanted to bring her up. So let's see. Hey, Deanna.
Hi, thank you for having me, Amber.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you probably don't want me to say this, but Deanna was not feeling too well earlier today, okay? And she called me and let me know that regardless, she was going to make it here. And so, of course, you can't tell because she looks fabulous as always. So, Deanna, thank you so much for joining us. I've already introduced you briefly as the founder of District Legal Group, a law firm based here in DC, but throughout the DMV. Right. You all are doing amazing work at the intersections of civil rights, employment law. And so we'd love to kind of hear your perspective before I bring your partner up here. And maybe you guys can have a conversation about what you all are both seeing in both of your practices right now. But really, what has been the impact of these first 100 days on your clients, whether that's as a result of the reductions in force that are happening at the federal level or at the local level? What are you seeing?
If I could describe it in one word, I think that first word would be chaos, right? And I think, because we've at District Legal Group transitioned to, at this point, a full service firm. So we do everything from employment to civil rights litigation, to business law, to trademark, generally contract work. So we've been seeing the impact, I think, from different angles. But from the employment space specifically, because really that is the space that I think has had the most prominent impact in these first 100 days, because there's been a direct target on the workforce, the federal government workforce and the contractor workforce, right? And that has a direct correlation to the DEI initiatives. But here's the thing, Project 2025 previewed most, if not all of this for us when the current president was on the campaign trail. And so what we're really seeing now is kind of a aberration of what was already projected to come and what was anticipated to come. And I think it's one thing for there to be a projection, it's another to live through the reality. And the reality has caused pure chaos. We have a very heavy federal practice group at District Legal Group. We have a very heavy private practice group at District Legal Group, both in the employment and labor spaces. Where you have people who are already essentially having grave concern about the status of their employment, right? For discriminatory reasons, because they are whistleblowers and then they feel that they're being subsequently retaliated against for being a whistleblower, because they think that they have a right to an appointment or an entitlement to a job, and somehow that right is being infringed upon. This is already a very disconcerting practice area for many people. So on top of these issues that already exist, to now essentially wake up and not know if you're going to have a job or not causes pure chaos. It's caused chaos for the employees. It's causing chaos for the attorneys. I think probably in the first 30 days, I had current clients. A lot of people say, oh, your business is probably booming even more because of what's currently happening with 47 in that administration. Well, it's not even new people, right? It's old people. It's old clients. It's clients whose cases have already been in the pipeline, who are now concerned and scared about how their current cases, not ones that haven't been filed, not ones that are being thought about being filed, not ones that need a consultation about being filed, but how their current cases are going to be impacted. So I've had a lot of resurgence of client calls from people whose cases were otherwise in a waiting or holding pattern, just in pure panic, because they want to know what's going on with their case. They want to know how this is going to impact their case. They want to know if there's going to be a court that even exists to hear their case, and what the type of work that we do spans courts, it spans administrative tribunals. And so the reality is I am not a fortune teller, and nor am I a mind reader. And it's frustrating for me because I have to make a lot of projections based on case precedents, based on past experiences, based on my 14 years of practice of law. But there is such arbitrariness and capriciousness that is happening within this administration. There is no respect for the rule of law. There is no respect for stare decisis, which is basically case precedent for our viewers who may not know that. There's really no respect for any order whatsoever. And it's a complete disregard to the courts. It's a complete disregard to everything that is not federally mandated. Now, why do I point out federal mandates? Well, because as I've told a lot of my clients, one thing that is still true is federal law is still federal law. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still good law. The Civil Rights Act, Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act is still good law. And while, there are situations where it seems concerning about whether or not the power of those statutes will still prevail, what I think we've also seen most recently, and kind of surprisingly, to be quite honest, is the courts are holding the line, at least at the U.S. District Court level, some at the United States Appellate Court level. I think we are still wondering what the United States Supreme Court is going to do. Unfortunately, with the Voting Rights Act decision that came out, I think summer of 2024, there was a lot of concern about what this seemingly conservative leaning Supreme Court is going to do. But I think what we kind of at the lower level and at the trial and appellate level are concerned about is if these cases get to that point, right? I think that we've been seeing the line being held, including by Trump appointees to the federal courts, hold rule and order and law that exist. And that is so important. And to me, as a trial attorney who practices in federal courts at the district court and appellate court level, it's very, very encouraging. And that is what I impart on my clients. That's what I encourage them with. I tell them, look at the news. Some of this news is changing just as fast as you snap your fingers, quite frankly. I mean, if you think about it, just a few weeks ago, tens of thousands of people were getting disenfranchised essentially from their jobs until a United States district court judge decided that that was not, on par with the law. And everybody had to be, sent back to work. And while those people are working and they're probably not necessarily doing the same level of work, my understanding is a lot of people have had job responsibilities stripped from them, work tasks stripped from them. So in many ways, they're just kind of sitting around collecting a check, talk about trying to save the government money. But nevertheless, what we're still seeing is that there is within the courts a holding of the line. What I think the administration currently is trying to do is push that line to get it to the Supreme Court, because there seems to be some comfort in understanding that the current United States Supreme Court is more conservative leaning and arguably is more Trump leaning. Right. And as a result of that, I think there is some concern there. But I think if we have the U.S. district courts and the United States appellate courts hold the line to rule, to order, to justice, right, because justice is a very long arc, we can at least hold it tight for the next 3 years and 8 months approximately. And so when I say chaos, I genuinely mean it. It's encouraging to also see the American Bar Association put out a statement to support the fact that we will not wither to tyranny. Essentially, I'm kind of summarizing. I'm not saying that they called 47 at a time. But it is encouraging to see that the American Bar Association has put out statements with high regard to making sure that we continue to respect the rule of law, because as lawyers, that is important for us. As lawyers, that is what we hold true. That is why we have professional obligations. And that is why as lawyers, we are held in higher regards. We are, in terms of our profession, we are some of the highest regarded professionals, in addition to medical doctors, of course, and probably pastors, probably in the country. And so I think with the chaos has to come some calm and assurance. And that is our job, to ensure as advocates that we don't lose our heads and we understand that the federal law is still the federal law.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for that. As you all can see on the screen, I put up, just that some reassurances, right, that Deanna's offering, right? Title VII, the Civil Rights Act, these laws that have been there to protect our rights at the federal level are still there, right? I think it's important to note in my opening remarks, I acknowledge a lot of what's happening, right, that's affecting, our day-to-day experiences has been a product of executive orders, which allow for President Trump to circumvent the congressional process, which means that laws aren't being, replaced. They're not being overturned necessarily by the courts. They're just being ignored. Right. And so it's our responsibility, I think, as Deanna reminds us, right, to reassure you all that there's still the law. And as a result, we should be defending you based on that. Right. So I would love to bring Andrew up as well. Right. Because at this point, right now, we're invoking these civil rights laws as a way to protect employees' rights. And so we'd love to hear kind of how you all's practices interact at District Legal Group, and maybe what are some other trends that we're seeing beyond the scope of employment law as it relates to civil rights law. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, I'm back. What's going on,
partner?
Deanna? I'm in the background just listening to you, Deanna. I'm like, nah, she's lying about being sick. There's no way. She just pushed all that out, on her deathbed.
just for clarity, I literally got out of urgent care this morning. So
yeah, just amazing talent, Deanna. I'm always in awe of, I know we're law partners, but I'm always in awe to hear you speak about employment law, because it just shows your passion, no matter what you're going through, that you always show that kind of passion for employment law. It's just, it's amazing, Deanna.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Andrew, weigh in here, right? So what are we seeing, right, at the intersections of employment and civil rights law? And then maybe where's your practice diverge, and speak to some of the other issues that we're seeing in terms of civil rights law?
Yeah. So like Deanna talked about, we're a full service law firm. So we do things that affect people's families, their employment. Also, if they, we usually see people at their lowest point, whether it be criminal defense or even with personal injury. So when it comes to the intersection and how this has had an effect, it's had an effect in ways that I wouldn't imagine. I just did a consult with someone maybe about a month ago who was concerned about losing their housing as a result of what's happening with the layoffs. And I think that that's what a lot of people aren't talking about. Is how is this housing market going to be challenged as a result of all the federal workers in DC that are currently being laid off? And then also, when we're talking about civil rights, I have a lot of notable civil rights cases. And the issue that I've seen with a lot of them is right now where, previous governments previous administrations may have wanted to settle cases. Now they're taking a little bit more of a hard-lined approach, which is fine by me, because there's nothing better for me than to get up before a jury and speak my case. So for me, it's fine. It's going to take a lot longer for those cases to resolve. But there was an executive order on March 22nd, and it shook me to the core. I was out to dinner with my wife and, enjoying a nice glass of wine. And I'm looking down at my phone, and I see it come across that this executive order is attacking lawyers for just filing lawsuits. And one of the things I wanted, excerpt I wanted to read from it, it said, I further direct, and this is March 22nd, the executive order titled Preventing Abuses of the Legal System in the Federal Court. And I've also been seeing so many ads ran. I watch a Hulu, a YouTube, and I've seen so many ads ran against this, against preventing abuses of the legal system, which is direct attack, especially on civil rights attorneys. And it says, I further direct that the Attorney General to take all appropriate action to refer for disciplinary action any attorney whose conduct in federal court or before any competent court of the federal government appears to violate professional conduct rules, including rules governing meritorious claims and contentious, and particularly in cases that implicate national security, homeland security, and public safety, right? This is something that I take seriously because a lot of civil rights cases get kicked either at the motions level or the summary judgment level. And at the motions level is when you file a complaint and the opposing side files a motion to dismiss, saying that you haven't stated a claim upon which relief can be granted. And sometimes it's due to this qualified immunity clause that gives the officers the right to do what they did, and in many cases, and in my cases, kill someone. And it gives them that ability to kill them, but because they're officers, they're immune from suit, right? And when I read this and I think about those cases that I have, that I'm giving families an opportunity for their day in court, an opportunity to be heard, and I'm seeing that now this government attorney is going to be able to weaponize an executive order against me for speaking up and being the voice of my client. It's scary. And it's a very, very scary time to be a lawyer, especially a civil rights lawyer, when you're thinking that every single case that I file is going to be scrutinized by the other side. And I may get a bar complaint from them. I may get a motion for sanctions against me for that, for that filing. And it's a scary time to be a lawyer because in our profession, we take those types of things seriously. We're not bringing claims, at least most of us are not bringing claims just because we feel like someone told us something and we just put it on a piece of paper. We are going back and doing our due diligence and making sure that we can present these claims. But when it comes to civil rights, a lot of times the evidence is behind the curtain, right? They have all these immunities and all these protections to not provide us with information. So the evidence is behind the curtain, and we have to get past that motions to dismiss piece to get to discovery, to get to a lot of the evidence that the government withholds from us prior to filing a lawsuit. So it's just, for me, that executive order, especially that one, shook me to the core when I'm talking about doing civil rights and filing cases against the federal government, especially on a high level.
But let me just jump in there, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying. As advocates, we cannot be scared to be advocates. And Attorney Clark and I are never scared. Who was it that said we ain't never scared? At District Legal Group, we ain't never scared. We sue and go up against any and everybody. We'll also defend, right? If someone needs assistance with that type of work as well. But I think, what we're seeing, and I know earlier the comment was made talking about kind of how some of the larger law firms are unfortunately cowering to the current administration's will, directives, desires. And I think that is severely problematic, right? Because as lawyers, we are empowered in a very nuanced way to lawyer. And we have, some people choose to be litigators, some people choose to do transactional work, some people choose to do consulting. But specifically as litigators, as lawyer litigators, and then I think generally as lawyers respectively, we are empowered to know what we can and cannot do. We are empowered to advocate for, certain things based on certain thresholds, based on certain legal standards. And we cannot be afraid to do that. I think that part of the challenge that we're also seeing with some of these law firms is that there have been some political interests intertwined in what they do every day, right? Especially if some of these larger law firms, and we know a lot of larger law firms represent big corporate entities, and we know that at District Legal Group because we do sue a lot of big corporate entities, and a lot of these larger law firms are on the other side of the V that we're suing, right? And so because some of these larger entities, may have some political leanings that are in alignment with the current president's administration, or at least the prior 45's administration, 45, 47, same person. So I 45 and 47 is how I like to articulate the expression of the current administration.
We're talking about the 47th administration. That is how today's conversation was framed.
Yes,
for sure.
And so just kind of going back. So I think because of some of the interests that either stem from the 45th administration's administration and how it was administering its administration, and now we're here at 47 and we're seeing chaos, like I said, occur. I think that there have been some loyalties that have been created, maybe through financial gain of some sort, maybe through the representation or advocacy of certain interest groups, right, which obviously has a direct correlation with money and how their bills get paid and how the real estate that they have their very nice, lovely, large law firms positioned on are, having the lights bills paid for. I think because of that, there's now a conundrum, because I would venture to say many people at these large law firms are not in agreement nor alignment with some of the positions that they're taking, right? Kind of to be in alignment with the current administration. But it's almost like when you dance with the devil, right? You dance with the devil sometimes. If anybody's seen Sinners, by the way, very good movie. Shout out to Sinners.
One of our speakers put out a good op-ed about it. So I'm excited to kind of see how we can tie that in.
Yeah, but when you dance with the devil, sometimes that dance lasts a lot longer, and sometimes it's a lot harder to untwine yourself from that dance. But nevertheless, I think what is unfortunate is that we have a lot of lawyers who seem to be kneeling down and bowing down, and that is not why I went to law school. I did not go to law school. I did not spend all this loan money. I did not, get my LLM in litigation and dispute resolution to incur more loans to cower, to bow down, to not be an advocate, to not advocate for what I understand to be true. And what I understand to be true is the rule of law and what we see in writing. And I think that there's a lot of nervousness. There's a lot of cowardice, to be honest. And there's a lot of people who are not acting boldly. And it's very unfortunate to see that. Sometimes people liken large law firms and they say it's the golden handcuffs. Well, unfortunately, I think that we're seeing some of that golden handcuff in action. We're seeing it in real life. And it really is unfortunate, because we have a lot more power than I think some people would understand. And if we collectively, like we've seen many lawyers do, filing different lawsuits against the administration, filing collective actions, filing class actions, that's the way to get heard. I did a consult with someone who, had a question about a collective action being filed with the Office of Special Counsel because of all these layoffs. And it was so interesting because from my perspective, the Office of Special Counsel has never actually done that before. But it was such a unique idea. I wish I was a lawyer that thought of that, to be candid with you. But it was such a unique way to be a creative litigator. And I love creative litigation. And so to do that, it not only drew more attention to the issue, it kind of almost expedited this whole layoff issue and got it into a national platform by an agency that you don't really see typically take a lot of initiative, quite candidly, to really enter into kind of the litigation stratosphere. Typically, the Office of Special Counsel, they do their investigations. They, you exhaust your administrative remedies. You go to the Merit Systems Protection Board, and that's where the litigation process occurs, right? And then you get your hearing if you get that far, if you get out of the jurisdictional argument proceeding, and then you go on and you hopefully win. But here, people didn't even have to do that. It was just the fact that the Office of Special Counsel identified an opportunity, and they took that opportunity and they used that opportunity. And that is the type of power, that is the type of leverage that we as lawyers have. We have to think. We have to use our brains. We have very powerful brains. You didn't pass the bar for nothing, right? And we have to bind together and use what we know to be true. Use the justice of our heart, that we as lawyers have. Use our professional obligations to ensure that we are maintaining a profession that still exists. Because I know you're going to have someone come up who's going to talk about AI, artificial intelligence. And there is also an attack on our profession with AI. You got, bar association conferences now telling lawyers you need to learn how to use AI, how to use Chat GPT, essentially how to use a robot to help you do your job, and that is concerning for me, because when I took the bar so many years ago, it was a lot of work. And I just think that has an impact on how our profession shapes up as well, right? Because you aren't going to have lawyers. Let me say it this way. You're going to have new lawyers entering the profession who are not going to know the same level of grit that lawyers who've been practicing 10 plus years or even 8 plus years know, to be lawyers, to be effective, to think outside of the box. And I think that is concerning, because there's going to be a huge reliance now on Chat GPT and these artificial intelligence programs. But the reality is, if you can't beat them, you join them, right? And so I think have to enter into the profession understanding that there is additional foresight now that we have to embrace as well in digital technology.
1,000%. Thank you so much. I'm interjecting because I'm looking at the time, and we still have an amazing group of folks that are going to weigh in specifically about that topic, right? So I think that's a great segue. I think just to kind of tie what you all are mentioning, right? There's so much chaos happening, but it's our role, particularly as attorneys, but I think litigators in this moment, right, are really being challenged to step up to the plate and demonstrate that, they didn't sign up for this profession to back down when they were faced with a fight, right? And this is the fight, I would argue, of a lifetime for so many.
It's the fight for your life.
And Attorney Smith, before I go, I just need 45 more seconds to talk about something.
Right, you got 45.
45 seconds. Put me on the clock. Put the shot clock up. I have 45 more seconds to talk about something that I think is very important, that I feel like, especially because there's non-lawyers in the room, that we kind of gloss over. And that's what the definition is of the rule of law. So you, of course, have the executive branch, you have the legislative branch, and then you have the judiciary branch. Right now, we're seeing a shift of power where the judiciary branch is always that strongest branch. You always are able, no matter what happens with the executive branch and what happens with the legislative branch, you can always go to the judicial branch to get relief. And we're seeing the federal government right now disrespecting and just completely deciding not to follow court orders. And we're seeing that even here when we're talking about Kilmar Garcia, a Maryland man who was unlawfully deported. And we're talking about that situation there. That's a perfect example of what the rule of law is, when they've been ordered to do something and they say, hey, look, we're just not going to do it. What are you going to do? Because the Supreme Court doesn't have an army. They can't force the federal government into doing anything. And they're kind of exposing that small fault that we always learn about in law school, right? But we never once would have thought that we would see someone from the executive branch exercise their power in that way. And that's why the rule of law is so important. And that's why it needs to be upheld, because us as little people, us as citizens, we need to always know that if the court says, if Judge so-and-so says X, Y, Z, that even the most powerful person in the world, who's the president of the United States, is going to follow that. Thank you so much, Amber, for your time. Deanna, I'm sure you're going to go get yourself some tea. Toddy put some overproof rum in there for my Jamaican Massive, and I'll talk to y'all later. See you.
No, thank you all so much. I just added to the screen. I agree, Chris. It definitely appears to be a dynamic duo. I can affirm that it is. I think you all just got a taste of this. But of course, please connect with them on socials at District Legal Group and via their website. As you can imagine, if you register for today's program, you will have access to all the information. But I'll go ahead and remove the comments so you can see their information, take a screenshot, connect with them on LinkedIn or what have you. But thank you all so much. I think this is a perfect segue, right? Because we're talking about the ways in which our profession is being attacked, the rule of law is being attacked, but also how this administration is operating above the law, right? Even when the judicial branch does its job, right, we're seeing them resist. And so I think it begs the question, how do we continue to resist, right? As business owners, as individuals. And so I'm going to bring Tanisha back up, who again is joining us from London. So I know that she is ready to catch some Z's shortly, but I want her to come back so we can quickly revisit this conversation around DEI, because I think it intersects with all of what we're talking about today. So thank you all both so much. See y'all soon. If y'all can stick around to the end, please do, while we have some more questions. Okay. All right, perfect. So all right, Tanisha, we're back. Thank you so much. Now, I know I was trying to be the moderator earlier, and I had to cut you off a bit. because I wanted you to, essentially have the stage to yourself to really speak more about, what your organization is doing at Red Tree Strategies to help folks navigate this space, particularly as relates to DEI, and really exhibit courage in this moment, which I think so many of our speakers are embodying before we move into this larger conversation around business ownership and asset ownership in this era.
Yeah, shout out to the attorneys who were just on too. You really put together some powerhouses, Amber. I think at Red Tree, we're really trying to take a two-pronged approach here with our clients. The first one is teaching. We hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think there's so many ideas of what those words mean. So that's like our first approach. We want to make sure that people actually understand and know what those words mean. And then we infuse the law when we're talking about it. And so I start off every conversation talking about what diversity, equity, and inclusion really means so that we can be on the same page. So that's where this conversation starts. Diversity in its simplest form is it's just all the ways that we differ. So it's height, it's whether you wear glasses or not, it's job status. You're from Virginia, right, Amber? From Virginia,
Wisconsin, but I spent my formidable years in Virginia.
Okay, it's geography, it's differences, it's fraternity, sororities. And so it literally means all the ways that we differ. But when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we zoom in specifically on identities that have historically been marginalized. So these are identities that have faced systemic barriers to access and opportunity. Then we got equity. Equity is about ensuring fair access and fair opportunity. And here's where the fear usually creeps in for folks because of the word equality, which gives everyone the same thing. That makes people a little bit more comfortable. But equality, it assumes that everyone starts at the same place. It treats fairness like a zero-sum game. Like there's a pie, and if someone gets a bigger slice, then that means someone else gets a smaller slice of the pie. But the truth of the matter is that there were folks who were never served a slice of that pie. And when we talk about equity work, if we're getting real honest, the people who never had access to that pie are the folks who were harvesting the apples. They were the first folks in the kitchen cooking and baking the pie, serving the pie, but never being allowed that slice. And so equity makes sure to correct that imbalance. And then inclusion means that all those diverse folks actually have influence and decision-making power. They can be their authentic selves. And so DEI is about race, it's about gender, but it's also about veterans who are transitioning into the civilian workforce. It's about people who are navigating different inaccessible systems, or small business owners without equitable access to capital, or rural communities who are left out of opportunity pipelines. And so DEI really is about closing the gaps that were created, again, as a result of these laws and policies that were sanctioned by the government at some level. And so when we zoom into the law component of this, I just want to say, no matter what's repeated over and over again, discrimination is still very much so real, and it's still very much so illegal. And so it's not just about personal bias or bad behavior. Legally, discrimination means treating someone unfairly because of a protected characteristic. So that could be anything from race to gender to disability to age. It denies them fair access and opportunity. And so when the systems or policies or decisions deny people what others receive simply because of who they are, that is discrimination. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion works to repair and reckon with those harms that have been done as a result of these state-sanctioned policies. And so it's grounded in law. We zoom into the law at this point, and as my fellow colleagues have said earlier, there are tangible federal laws that ensure that we are able to uphold diversity, equity, and inclusion because it simply is a vehicle. And so the first one is the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees equal protection under the law. So it was written to correct structural harm, especially for Black Americans after slavery. And it was created because, again, that playing field was unequal. Deanna just mentioned Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits workplace discrimination. Then you have Title VI of the same act, which protects people from discrimination in federal funded programs. And so that framework it's being distorted right now. That's what we're seeing. So the laws are still there, the facts are still there, but the framework is being distorted. So where Title VI used to be about preventing racial discrimination, it's now being weaponized to silence conversations about race and about equity. And as one of my favorite poets and authors, Audre Lorde, reminds us, your silence will not protect you. And so the same is true for our institutions. The same is true for lawyers. The same is true for corporations who are doing this work. Silence won't protect them either. And so in this moment, we are called to speak truth about what diversity, equity, and inclusion really is, who it's really for, and why it still matters. And so, we're hearing phrases like illegal DEI and unfair preference tossed around like they're facts, but they're not facts. And this is not about unfair preference. But if we want to get real honest about whose preferences have been protected in America, we can talk about that. So, for example, white men only make up about 30% of the US population, yet they hold about 85% of Fortune 500 CEO roles, about 75% of congressional seats, about 80% of top law firm equity partnerships, and Black, Brown, Indigenous, and women make up the majority in this country, but we remain underrepresented in decision-making and overrepresented in low-wage sectors. And so that's not equity. And that's definitely not equal protection in practice. And so just zooming in again, and I know time, but these laws were created to prevent discrimination, not because discrimination, again, is accidental, but because it was systemic and intentional. So Title VII wasn't passed because of workplace bias was just like a misunderstanding. It was passed because Black people were intentionally denied jobs, promotions, and fair treatment. The affirmative action wasn't about handouts. It was designed to interrupt injustice. And it worked until it made the wrong people uncomfortable. Title IX, it wasn't about discriminating against men. It was a response to the systemic exclusion of women from education, leadership, athletics. And even if we think about folks with disabilities, we have Section 504 in the Americans with Disabilities Act. These weren't about special treatment, but they were enacted because people with disabilities were routinely segregated, they were institutionalized, and they were denied access by law. So these weren't flaws, they were responses to a system that was the flaw. And so we're seeing that with this administration. So starting in January, we saw Trump sign an executive order dismantling all federal DEI initiatives. Staff were placed on administrative leave. DEI programs across federal agencies were halted. And you've mentioned, Amber, executive orders. And I just want to stress again that an executive order is just a directive issued by a president. It's not a law that's passed by Congress. It doesn't override the Constitution. It can't erase civil rights protections that are rooted in constitutional law. And so those things we have to keep repeating over and over again to drown out some of the other things that we're hearing. We saw the Dear Colleague letter about the Department of Education and withholding money from educational institutions. Again, Dear Colleague letters are not law. They're not court rulings. They're not legally binding in the way that a statute is. And so we, again, want to drown out that noise. And so across the country, we've seen everything from universities being targeted to companies being targeted to nonprofits subjected to pressure, campaigns to abandon their DEI programs. And the point of all of this is to reframe diversity, equity, and inclusion as the problem, when fundamentally it's not. There are still legal protections. There are still legal obligations for folks. And so as was mentioned, we have seen powerful truths happen and courage happen in action, whether it's companies who are publicly saying, we're going to continue our DEI efforts, we're going to continue to lead with equity. We've seen organizations like some of my old stumping grounds, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, the Lawyers Committee, filing federal lawsuits across the country. We saw 3 federal judges just last week issue preliminary injunctions halting the administration's attempt to strip public funding. And so we are seeing courage in action. We are seeing moral leadership, but now we just have to continue continue that. And so when I'm asked if DEI is illegal, my response is no, it's not illegal. What is illegal is discrimination. What's courageous is refusing to look away. And so right now, as Audrey said, silence won't protect us. And for many of us, it never has. So we have to continue speaking and teaching and leading. And at Red Tree Strategies, we really help people to do this with clarity and compliance and a whole lot of courage. So
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Tanisha, for, again, revisiting this conversation, because I want to, again, make that connection. You acknowledge, right, it's not just about folks, in one space or another. It's also about the small businesses, right, seeking capital that are now being shut out under the guise of, venture capitalists being afraid to invest in diverse companies right now, things of that nature. And so I wanted to bring up a question from one of our audience members, Jeremy Garcia. Thanks so much for joining. He has a question that with the attack on DEI, what do we see happening with minority and women-owned businesses, since they're based on these suspect classes and unconstitutional remedial programs, allegedly based on race and gender? I will say I posted to various social media platforms some policy and programs that protected minority women-owned businesses, even in the midst of this attack. And since then, as of this month, the Minority Business Development Agency has been completely defunded, causing the 38 agencies or business centers across the nation to shutter. So we're already seeing the resources for these groups, either shrink or disappear. So quickly, Tanisha, can you maybe weigh in on what you think will be the impact, maybe from the perspective of enterprises, things of that nature? And then this is going to segue into the conversation with Denzel, who's going to speak to maybe what are those resources for these businesses in this climate.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge that a lot of folks are facing. As you mentioned, one of the big things is going to be our collective power, to be very honest, and our community power. With the rollbacks of these federal funded programs, we're going to have to come together as business owners and as a collective to ensure that we have the access to capital that we need. And also, there is still, when we talk about minority and women-owned businesses, there are still grants for small-owned businesses. There are still grants for and capital for businesses and entrepreneurs that are starting up. And so we still have access to that. What we have to do now is figure out the best way to play the game to still get the capital that we need in order to fund our businesses, even if they're not going to come through the federal space, at least for right now. And then again, the other big piece of this is we have to have that community aspect. And, we've been a resilient people. We have a framework of history to help us move forward. So we have to use that framework and adapt to all of the changes that we're seeing as well. That's the challenging piece.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much again, Tanisha, for joining us all the way from across the pond. And sharing these insights. Folks, please be sure to connect with Tanisha via LinkedIn. I'll go ahead and take the comment down so you can see her name, see her company's name, find them online. If you're looking for ways to make sure that your organization is complying with the laws that are still in the books, right? And not executive orders that are demanding people to comply with laws that don't exist. And to do so in a way that exhibits the courage that I think we all need in this moment. Thank you so much, Tanisha. Feel free to stick around. I know we're getting down to the wire, so I have a feeling these last few speakers are going to be able to take up this last half hour, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And so happy to be in this space. We need more of it. So I appreciate you, Amber.
Thanks, Tanisha.
Good to see you.
All right. So I know, y'all, we're supposed to be moving forward. Clearly, we need more than 2 hours, and I'm excited for this maybe to snowball into some more conversations. But I'm going to go ahead and bring on my friend Denzel, who I've had the pleasure of working with in the context of helping clients secure capital. We just had that amazing question from Jeremy about what does this moment mean for these minority women-owned businesses? And so, Denzel, can you speak to some of the what you're seeing, and of course, for those who are just joining, tell us a little bit more about what your experiences in helping folks, that might be on the call or like those on the call, secure the funding that they need for their businesses, regardless of who's in office.
Yep. Thanks again for the opportunity, and really excited to talk. As I said, in spite of the challenges, and there are real challenges, some concerning moves by this administration that affect all of us. I also see opportunity here. And so part of, I think, what I kind of just as a theme for my segment, which I'll keep short since we're running out of time, and I do want to kind of hear from people and hear questions, is I mentioned that my dad is from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so I definitely have that immigrant's optimism in spite of all the problems in this country. But I also want to bring in my mom, who's from West Philadelphia. And, regardless of your personal faith, one of the things that she, was talking to me, before this call, and like, I'm thinking, Mom, there's a lot of concern and a lot of fear, but I also want there to be a message of hope. And she reminded me of a Bible verse. And again, regardless of your personal faith or religious background, I think that this, verse is illustrative for all of us. And it's from Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 16 through 18. And it's a period in the history of the children of Israel where they've been displaced and their city's been destroyed. And now they're in the process of rebuilding. And the part that really stands out to me that I want to be a theme for all of us is this idea of the sword and the trowel. So I'm going to read real quick. It says, from that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. And so again, this is not about, whatever your personal religious beliefs are, or your faith. For me, that is, my Christian faith. But this idea here of having a sword, a weapon in one hand, and then also having tools for building in the other is kind of the message that I want to bring. And I say this as the corporate transactional attorney on the call. I'm much more of a builder, like my father who does construction, than a fighter. But the speakers before, whether it was Deanna, whether it was Attorney Williams, we have to fight, right? We need to advocate for our rights within the government, within the courtrooms. We need to have that sword and fight and advocate for our rights. But while we're doing that, I want us also to be building, to not get so distracted in the attacks on DEI or the attacks on us, which are real, and lose sight of the opportunity for us to build, to have, while we have that sword in our hand, we also have tools to build. And that's really what my practice is about. It's about building. And I think it's important now more than ever, as we feel that we're under attack, that we also understand that there are opportunities, just like every time in history, as Black and brown people, but in general, for people during this climate who feel like they're under attack, immigrants, that there are opportunities for us to not just fight and protect our rights, but to increase our power. And part of increasing our political power is increasing our economic power. So I'm glad that Ambur invited me on to talk kind of what I'm seeing in the market. So quick background on me. I mentioned some of my personal background. My dad's from Haiti. My mom's from West Philly, grew up in New York. Professionally, I went to Princeton for undergrad, NYU for law school, and then I started out practicing at Debevoise and Plimpton in New York, which is one of those big international, 700 lawyer firms. It's one of the firms that Trump has targeted, and we're still waiting as alum of Debevoise to see what they're going to do. But while I was there, I started out doing private equity fund formation, which in a nutshell is helping big investment management firms aggregate a bunch of capital in various investment vehicles, sometimes called funds, sometimes called special purpose vehicles. But the idea is gathering a bunch of money from other people in a way that's compliant with SEC regulations, and then deploying that capital to go out and buy other companies to improve them operationally, to add technology, to add talent, and then sell those businesses off or pieces of those businesses off in the future and provide a return to their investors. That's what I started off doing at the $1 billion level. From there, I transitioned to another firm, Wilson Sonsini, which is a California-based firm where I got more exposure to similar types of ideas of raising money and then making investments, but really focused on venture capital, which is a bit different than private equity, and tech companies. And so, from those experiences, I learned about raising money and about buying businesses, investing in businesses, and selling them off. And basically, I do the same thing now. I just focus on the lower middle market. So think deals between, 10 million to $100 million, which again, those are big numbers for me personally, but small compared to what I used to do when I was at the big firm. I bring that up because when we think about venture capital, when we think about private equity, we tend to only think about the big 100 million or $1 billion deals and don't see that venture capital and private equity, like any other aspect of business, are ways for us to build wealth and to protect our wealth as a community. And so speaking specifically about, we've had a lot of focus over the last few years on the venture capital and startup market, especially. And let's be honest here, when it comes to venture capital funding, people that look like us, whether it's Black and brown people, whether it's women founders, although we're a huge part of the population and are just as creative, if not more so, and innovative, coming up with great ideas, whether it's tech, whether it's creative businesses, we have not been getting that venture capital funding, right? And we've had various moves where, we've created our own venture capital funding organizations. There are funds like the Fear This Fund, which was also under attack recently to provide grants to minority and women startups. What I want to talk about here is that is very true, and that has not changed, and that's not something that's new under the Trump administration. Unfortunately, that access to capital, particularly for us that want to start, startups, that's been an issue regardless. What has changed in the VC market in general is that there's not a lot of cheap VC money in general. The market has kind of overcorrected where, there was a period, not for us, not for necessarily people that look like us, but for a lot of people, all they had to do was come up with an idea, form a basic entity. And, I have a piece of paper and a pitch deck saying, hey, I've created Uber for fill in the blanks, right? Everybody likes the Uber for blah, 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 or, this great idea. And then go with that piece of paper, they've been able to raise round after round of funding without really developing any value. The reason why I bring that up is because that has been the case, although not necessarily for our communities. A lot of people, especially white men, have been able to get that VC money and really, rather than focus on building a business, improving operations, developing the service, their job really became going out and fundraising. And the market has changed for everyone in that cheap VC money is not as available anymore. We're seeing now startups that before were getting these very gaudy financing rounds. So, okay, even though I have no product or no real business here, we project that my business is going to be worth $10 million. And so you're going to invest for a portion of equity based on this valuation, even though there's no revenues, right? That's changing. The exception being we're all seeing a lot of AI startups are still getting funded, and then med tech, health tech, there's a lot of funding available there. But I bring this up to say that even before Trump, a lot of us weren't getting that money for our startups. And so the first thing I want to say is that has not changed, but there's still an opportunity for us to start businesses. I work with startups on a regular basis. And the thing that we have as an advantage, even as the market as a whole has changed, is because we have not been getting access to that same funding, we historically are much better, and especially our women founded startups, where and working with entrepreneurs, I find oftentimes our female founders tend to be more cautious, tend to really want to make sure that they have the infrastructure in place, that they have the business, that it makes sense first before they reveal that baby to the world. And there's a strength in that. There's a power in that. And the fact that we actually have to develop a business before we can go out and ask people for money. And now the market in general is seeing that they're having to do that. And so for us, that's actually an advantage. Now, that's the first thing. That doesn't mean that we don't need funding. We still need funding. But the first thing I just encourage all startups right now is really focus on, it's not just about the idea, it's about the execution. It's about creating value. It's about figuring out, okay, you're not generating revenue right now, and this is not how we've been taught to run startups, but really, what is the product, what is the service, and how quickly can you start creating a version of that, an MVP, where you can start generating revenue. And if it's not generating revenue, there are opportunities to start, monetizing, commercializing early on that don't involve getting outside capital. That's the first thing I would say. We're already doing that. We're already good at that. But I want to encourage everyone to lean into that, because the market is forcing other founders to do that as well. The second thing I want to say is that venture capital and startup funding and startups is not everything. It's part of it. It's important. I work with startups. I work with Black startups on a regular basis. But we need to remember, I mentioned startups and I also mentioned private equity. Startups and VC are really a subset of private equity. What is private equity? In a nutshell, private equity is just moving private capital, investing private capital into private businesses, as opposed to going out to the public markets. That's what private equity is. It's not just for the big asset management firms that I used to work with. It's also for, my brother has a business and he needs some capital. And so, I gave him some money. And when I say gave, it came with, we papered it, and it came with some documentation that gives me equity, gives me a piece of his startup as in exchange for that money. But what I want to mention here is that the idea of capital being available, it's not just the startup money. It's also about just private equity in general. And there are opportunities for us as Black and brown and female founders or other, whatever you identify for. There's opportunities for us to get private capital. And so the thing that I'm most excited about, and again, I want to kind of open up for questions, but just to realize that there's opportunity for us, whether we're a traditional startup or whether we're a small business, a mom and pop business, which is a lot of my practice now, to access private equity, capital from investors that look like us, as well as investors who don't look like us, who realize that, hey, some of these startup investments that we're doing, the math is not mathing, that we're not getting the returns that we wanted. And these are not even people who necessarily care about social impact or care about Black and brown people or women, but they're realizing that these mom and pop businesses, these small businesses that we as Black and brown people have been grinding and creating and actually creating value. It's a real business. It's not just a piece of paper, or it is a startup, but it's a startup where, that young lady really worked on developing her product and her services, her platform. And yes, she's maybe been a bit shy to go out to VCs, but there's actually something there. There's a whole network of people, and it's growing. People that look like us, and also some of these bigger institutional investors who are now coming to us and saying, okay, how can I invest in these small businesses? And it's not necessarily the VC startup way. And so there have been changes in the administration that have been helpful for raising money through private equity. So, for example, getting rid of the Corporate Transparency Act as far as it applies to domestic individuals is a helpful thing for us, because it makes private equity kind of complicated, and I'm happy to talk about it. There also are some challenges. A lot of people who have discovered entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA. This is another word for this alternative to forming a startup that I mentioned. So people, you may be hearing about people going out and buying HVAC companies or plumbing companies, this type of thing. A lot of that has been funded not just with private equity, so equity investments for other people, but also SBA loans. And there have been changes to the SBA loan program that do affect those type of deals. So that's something else I'm happy to talk about. But just to take a step back, what I want to tell you is that I am working with both startups and with small businesses and investors who are looking to build businesses for us, whether that's from scratch with the startup or whether that's finding an existing business that already is doing something similar to what you want to do and needs your talent and your effort and some outside capital to make it happen. So what I want to say is, yes, we need our sword.
That's where
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
We need our swords, but we also need to be building, and there's opportunity through private equity and VC to do that.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Denzel has been on board since day one with this conversation. You all can tell I've been adding some captions here, just kind of summarize some of the major takeaways. And Denzel, stick around because I might be able to bring you back up as we move into this conversation on emerging tech and IP, as you can imagine, I envision us having ample time to talk about all these different things. But I think it's a reminder of all that has transpired over the last 100 days. But I thank you so much for that optimistic perspective on the state of business opportunities and funding opportunities for our communities. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and shift over to Chris, who specializes in democratizing IP. But I think Denzel, when he speaks about also making sure our organizations are well positioned, right, to receive funding and to attract investment, it looks like owning the assets that make us most valuable. So I think this will be great. Chris has developed a bit of a presentation for us, and then we're going to wrap things up with Professor Tanya Evans. I know we got some folks waiting to hear from her in the comments. And really quickly, I highlighted while Denzel was talking, Geneva White. Hey, Geneva. My client, my amazing client, Geneva, founder of Scope of Work, a creative talent agency in New York. She just mentioned, how comforting, right, this conversation is for you all. So I'm really glad to hear that feedback, and thank you all for continuing to engage in the conversation. This is really about creating that type of an atmosphere amidst all that's happening. And Geneva, you can imagine, and working with creatives of color has really felt the brunt of a lot of what's happening. So super excited to have her join us today, and for everyone else that's online. So thanks, Denzel. Stick around. All right. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring up Chris. And Chris, I'm going to give you the stage because you've got a presentation. So I'm going to remove myself. Can I remove myself? Let's see.
It's all good. Do you have audio, Amber, by the way? A sound check. Can you hear me, Amber?
Like, let me add myself. Okay, there you go. And then I'm gonna go ahead and pull your presentation.
Amber, just want to confirm, can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much to Denzel. And I know we're on the clock. So being both a lawyer, but also a technologist and a innovation nerd, I needed a slide. This is my optimistically realistic face. And I'm going to tell you why. Basically, to set the stage, keep it in a real world perspective. We're on a planet. You're one of 8.5 billion people, and we're here with others who are both entities as well as individuals. We work together, we create value in commerce as an economy. And most of the people are organized in governments. One of the things that stands out is that this new administration has touched every aspect of that mental model in the world today, either by cutting something, disrupting something, arguably engaging in something unlawful. And the last count was there were 222 lawsuits against the administration. I can send you a link if it's helpful. And they've disrupted things. That's in a context where things are already changing. But now let's introduce your interest in this. And this is one of the reasons my colleagues' work is so important. In the diagram you see at the bottom, there are the laws. There's the Constitution, the regulations, the treaties. At the top is your interest. As long as things are going well, people keep moving forward. But when there's a controversy, like someone's trying to send you outside the country, someone's trying to take something you have, there's an issue of lawfulness, there's a process for it. And that process is where attorneys and advisors add value. If that isn't complex enough for you, then we have things like technology coming in, artificial intelligence. Let me just mention one of the things about that process is extremely important. I have both a social impact AI-driven and blockchain startup that uses technology to make intellectual property, the products of the mind, easier. I also have a social impact law practice that's helped over 109 creatives and entrepreneurs create $43 million to own financial value. And we took that process and put it into technology. The reason that matters is because when you look at the way the world works, you want someone who knows how that due process works and can give you advice you can rely on, advice you can take to court, like district legal. Technology tools like the artificial intelligence we developed can help, but they can't do that. They can't give you accurate information. I've had a client that used artificial intelligence, and we encourage our clients to, and had a solution to a problem they had where someone was stealing from them a trademark. We looked at the law, and we found that there was a unique law that the AI had missed that allowed that client to not only stop the stealing, but then we're intervening and we're arguing to retain that intellectual property right, that trademark for that client. The best combination that we see from our research is technology and attorneys working together. And that's why we've built our technology product. To put a pin in it, and then I'm going to move a little bit faster after this, I want to share some real world stories briefly. In the image in the upper left-hand corner, that's my uncle. He wrote a hit song in the 60s, should have been worth $1 million to him. He didn't understand copyrights. He was the son of farmers. Result is he missed $1 million opportunity and generational wealth. We developed our law practice and our technology to support people like my uncle so that he would be aware of what he had and be able to protect it affordably. That's the context in which we're reaching out to empower you and also working with our colleagues here on this call. We want you to know that you're not alone. And when it deals to things like AI governance, artificial intelligence is out in some cases using or stealing your intellectual property, your copyrights, maybe your trademarks. If you allow it to, maybe trade secrets, which are things that have value, perhaps even borrowing from your patents and using them in ways that they shouldn't. Attorneys working with you are your best tool to protect yourself. You're not required to have an attorney, you can do it yourself. But that's a powerful combination when they bring together your knowledge of the facts, the attorney's knowledge of the law, and then you're working together to look at the precedent to protect your interests. It doesn't have to be you against the world. In this corner in the upper left hand, you see a client of ours, and we have her permission to share, Najwa Womack. Najwa is in composting. She's in Southeast DC. She's using both copyright to protect a song that she developed to make composting interesting, but she's also using technology to protect her copyright in that song. That's the attorney and technology combination. Working within this overall context of the law, you're interested, in this case, Najwa's interest in due process. What does that mean for you today in this era of tariffs and turmoil? It means don't stop. Use your resiliency skills. Use your innovation, because individually you are a walking life experience idea factory. And those ideas have value in the form of intellectual property. For example, like our client Michael here, we talked about artificial intelligence. Michael invented an artificial intelligence-driven solution for which he received a patent that helped to avoid collisions. He wanted to save lives, and he used artificial intelligence to do that. One of the strengths we have at TIL and also at our law practice is we know both the AI side as well as the business and law side. What that's empowered us to do is to come up with things like that image you see in the left-hand corner. That's Tilly. Tilly is our artificial intelligence chatbot. She does nothing but intellectual property. She doesn't go to sleep. She will give you intellectual property answers, and we offer her to our clients and our community at no cost. And we offer it because Tilly can then stimulate that knowledge that helps you understand whether you have an opportunity that can be pursued with the help of an attorney, on your own, or through other advisors. So to put a pin in it, you are not alone, and you are in fact empowered by this dislocation. Yes, you need to, as Keisha said, you need to have someone on your team ready in case they come for you for whatever reason that may be pretextual, or it may be they think legit. You need to be ready to defend yourself. But in times of disruption, there are also opportunities. So you need to be able to pursue those where it makes sense for your interest. So your considerations might be your own agency, where you can use technology like artificial intelligence, but from a government perspective, make sure you read the agreements. You'll be amazed at what some of those agreements allow companies to do. So if you don't want to read it, get an attorney, get someone you trust, but read the agreements. Second, in building your agency, diversify. To give you a couple of numbers, the global economy for gross domestic output is roughly about 110 to 130 trillion dollars. The US is about 25% of that. It's about 26, 27 trillion dollars. If you think of it another way, that means the US is not 75% of that, which means there are global opportunities where people have capital, they want to invest in businesses, they want to create partnerships. And that gets to the next point, diversification. Start to think about the possibilities of what you can do for diversifying your products, your services, and your geographic scope. Our clients are 60% in the US, 30% in Asia, and 10% in Africa, and we intend to expand our global footprint. Next to last, ecosystem. Build more contacts with the organizations and people that you hear on this Zoom, but also in other communities, and innovate, because that innovation has financial value for you. And that gets to the last point of value. There's value as a business. There's value for you as a person who might be seeking employment by understanding your ability to innovate. And there are the values that you have for what you think is right. And that means that you might want to consider, if it's consistent with your conscience, standing up and opposing when you see something that's unlawful happening, like what we're seeing today. So in summary, let me draw from some folks that I think are a lot wiser and more noteworthy than I. And I think it resonates with what our team has shared today. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So when you hear or see someone being sent out of the country without due process, someone being deprived of their rights, someone looking to take away something to which they're entitled as a government because it's arbitrary and capricious and making stuff up, think about how you might want to step up for that. And in fact, tomorrow I'll be with a bunch of lawyers at the Supreme Court making that case for why the rule of law matters, as our team has discussed. Last but not least, I'll mention one of the things and one of the reasons we focus on intellectual property, because intellectual property, being the product of the mind, is an intangible asset. Anyone has the potential to create it. And that makes it one of the most empowering things. And it's why we pursue social impact. And by creating intellectual property for yourselves and for others who are historically underrepresented, it helps the tide to rise. And so for folks who want to oppose us, they might want to understand that, as John F. Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats. So thank you to Ambur for the opportunity. From an AI governance perspective, make sure you read the details and have a portfolio of people who can support you, and look forward to next steps. So I'm going to hand it back to Ambur and give a round of applause to you for engaging today.
Thank you so much, Chris. You have been, again, one of the invitees tonight that have been on board from the beginning. I really appreciate you. And Chris has also helped to facilitate a monthly conversation, What's Up in Global Law, with the Global Chamber of Commerce. And he does so much amazing work. We first connected, I think, just as Georgetown alum, but then eventually as members of the DMV IP Alliance. And so, as you can tell, he has a wealth of knowledge, but he was able to condense it into this presentation. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully you all really felt inspiration, right, from this idea that, we can build our own ecosystems, and through innovation, right, we can add value, not only to ourselves and our businesses, but to our entire communities, a global community, if you will. So thank you so much, Chris. Feel free to stick around, because just in case we do have some time for other questions. Now, I know we're technically at the 2-hour mark, but this stream is going to keep going. And of course, if you register, you will get the recording. Now, last but absolutely not least, I'm going to bring up a mentor, a friend, a colleague, a fellow attorney, and soon to be former Professor Tanya Evans, as she looks into this next phase in her amazing journey. I know a lot of folks have really been looking forward to this. So again, if you have to cut off, just know you will have access to this afterwards. But Tanya, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing excellently, fabulously well. I almost forgot that I was supposed to say something because I was knee deep in the conversation. And hats off to you. I know you do not like receiving flowers in real time, but can we get some love in the chat for this amazing, dynamic, social and economic justice warrior who has brought us all together for such a time as this? I need to do that for you, sis.
Received. I know. Yes. We can be humble to a fault, but I'm learning from folks like you, I think, do an amazing job of marketing all of your brilliance to the world, to receive that. So I truly do. Thank you, everybody in the chat. But without further ado, I want to hear from you. because, again, as we have this conversation around innovation, right, and looking towards the future, but also analyzing what's going on with this administration, we know that out the gate, right, we've been hearing nonstop conversation around crypto, digital assets, which up until January, right, was still seen as something that was, really an outlier, right, on the Hill, and we were still trying to convince Congress to get on board with regulating an industry that presents a lot of opportunity and use cases beyond, right, crypto, but that we weren't really seeing that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull your slides up and let you take over this conversation, so that folks can understand kind of what should we be thinking about when it comes to crypto in this moment, but large, more so the conversation around digital assets, and maybe Web3 and all that as well. Okay.
Absolutely. While you're pulling that up, I'll say a couple of words so that we can just jump into the meat of it and keep it going. We are just over 100 days into the 47th administration, the second term. We can go to slide 2, and we can start there, Amber. We've already clearly witnessed this seismic, or I'm looking for a different word for seismic, tectonic. Let's go with tectonic shift in the federal government's stance on digital assets. We heard the promises during the lead up to November 4th promise, and then the promise that was declared about the United States being the crypto capital of the world, which I find to be an odd statement, given that we are working with, a global technology that isn't beholden to borders. That's actually the feature, not the bug, right? But what he said wasn't just campaign rhetoric. And we might all take a lesson for the first 100 or 180 days if you're following Project 2025 and Agenda 47, basically the same thing, that we've seen rapidly evolving legislative and executive initiatives. I think many legislators, regardless of their side of the aisle, learned a very difficult lesson in the last electoral cycle, that it's not a great proposition to be on the wrong side of digital assets. The devil really is in the details of how that is expounded upon. But within the first 30 days, the current president issued sweeping executive orders establishing crypto innovation and sovereignty, the Digital Assets Task Force. SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, who's spoken before my class over the years, is leading that effort as well. This is a cabinet level body that reports directly to the White House, but also is supposed to have some independence in addition to, teaching blockchain, crypto, and law. Shout out to some of my students in the comments who I see. This is supposed to be an independent agency of some sort, so that's interesting. But the job of the SEC is to overhaul kind of the overlapping, often contradictory regulations as between the SEC and the CFTC, as they wrangled over the proper token taxonomy, we'll say, what constitutes a security versus a commodity. Then we have stable coins. We also have the FIT 21 Act that deals with market structures. Well, we have a shifting scene for enforcement as well, moving from regulation by enforcement. I testified before the House Subcommittee on Digital Assets a couple of years ago to talk about this, covert strategy of regulation by enforcement, which I've found to be extrajudicial and certainly above and beyond the scope of the SEC. That being said, we have a lot to talk about, folks, in a short period of time, when we can, as lawyers and social architects, can also appreciate now when any administration is misusing their authority, and we can't lose that narrative as we also, at the same time, celebrate some of the things that open up markets. When we think about enforcement and how it's shifting under the prior administration versus now, the SEC's budget was reduced with funds as well. We can go on to the next slide. Ambur, as well, with funds reallocated toward policy guidance as well. So the kind of this like fast and furious in 100 days. Sometimes things of this nature take 100 years, real talk, but this is where we find ourselves. And so next slide, Ambur. Let's talk about politics as well, that crypto is no longer this fringe issue. It's mainstream, even though most people are not having the conversation that we're having right now. But with that attention comes scrutiny for consumers and users and investors and industry, and certainly, as well it should be, the administration. Last week, Senators Warren and Schiff called for an ethics investigation into Trump's private dinner with the top token holders for his Trump meme coin, or what I actually refer to as a celebrity coin. When I think of meme coins, I think of a community that has kind of the rise and fall dynamic. Celebrity coins bank off of the celebrity. This event that's coming up in May, it was promoted as this on-chain event. This isn't satire. This isn't The Onion. And I find it strange. I find this convergence of politics and populism and programmable money on one hand to be the moment that kind of we in the digital asset space were looking for and looking forward to, but we have to really critique and engage what it means for a sitting president and those within his administration leading the charge for the changes within the executive branch that are leading, hopefully, and necessarily to changes in the legislative branch. We see the Stable Act and the Genius Act. When they put it all together and is finally signed by the president, it will be the Stable Genius Act for stablecoins. Story for another day. We don't have time for us to educate that. But next slide. I do want to focus on kind of like what's missing in the law. What I've devoted my time to in terms of focusing on, what is beyond the JD. That's how kind of Ambur and I talk about this as well, about professional readiness for such a time as this, and not just any professional readiness, but what this means for those who are focused and committed to economic and social justice in a time where, in addition to all of the activity that's moving to progress innovation forward, if every other law and every other suggestion for a policy edict, which is also known as an executive order, is pointing in the opposite direction, are we really moving together in a concerted effort? And as social engineers, I went to Howard Law School as the editor-in-chief of the Law Journal, graduated with honors, ticked all the boxes inside the line, clerked in the Third Circuit, worked in big law for 10 years. I've been teaching for 17. So for over a quarter century, I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. And I want to make it plain. If you are a lawyer, an advisor, a policymaker, an executive who hasn't updated your playbook for what Ambur and my colleagues have talked about this evening, to make sure that your playbook for advocacy and zealous advocacy at that is not focused on the substantial digital asset era, you are operating at a competitive and an ethical disadvantage. We need you. We need you because the law is playing catch up to technologies that are evolving faster than the traditional regulatory cycle. And I want to give you a few hard truths about this JD that we all hold true and dear. And I'm licensed to practice law in 4 states, so I get it. But most law schools, and I'm a tenured professor, I'm a former associate dean, most law schools don't teach wallet security, tokenomics, DAO governance. If you have my class, you're ahead of the game. Most professionals don't understand how stablecoins work or how they're likely to be regulated as we move into this new dynamic. Few have the technical fluency to issue guidance on DeFi, tokenized assets, or smart contract auditing. And we can't effectively advise clients if we are not on the front lines of this. We can't properly evaluate risk. We can't advocate for proper compliance. And we certainly can't contribute meaningfully to legislation and innovation or governance shaping the future. Because right now, 2025, it's no longer good enough to say, I don't get it, or at this firm, we don't do it. If you're advising and building or regulating the next generation of organizations, you have to get Web3 ready. Next slide. So, as we kind of figure out what this means for our role, we have to engage this idea, is it justice or just us? And I think in these first 100 days, we already have, this is a rhetorical question, Amber, is it not? As we see that the question is asked, but it's also answered. At this moment, it's not about competition, but collaboration. It's about community. It's about the new cipher. What does cipher look like in a Web3 environment? How are we communicating? How are we leaving markers and points to let people know the next place to go? We have to start leveraging technology in a way that not only allows us to advocate for our clients, but also for our culture. And so, next slide, we can think about many different ways that there are attacks. It is also a feature, not a bug, to throw everything at everyone. So it feels like you're drinking from 10 fire hoses and you are forced to shrink. We are descendants of people who have been around for thousands of years. We have that at the cellular level. And with the tools and the technology and our education, we have to be at the front lines. Even if we're sitting on top of a building that's burning and sipping tea, the building's actually burning. So we can sit at the top, but eventually we have to do something about it, not to save the world, but save ourselves. And I know, and the data suggests that when we as professionals and when our community embraces forward progress and we get a buy-in, everybody else thrives. So kind of the final points about what the cost is when we're not involved is exponential. It's incalculable. And that's why town halls like this and opportunities to engage with this particular topic are so critical. And so next slide, it might even be the final slide I have to see. Oh, yes. So we could start to talk about what the next move will be and what your next right action will be, for sure. Especially when we are thinking about what justice looks like in these first 100 days, to be sure. Next slide. It also makes me think of, I missed it last time, so I want to come back just briefly to say this, and maybe we'll capture this in some Q&A as well. Not only in some of those early executive orders was digital assets identified, but artificial intelligence. I heard it come up earlier as well. And I invite you, I write for Forbes, and I'm always interested in what's next and what the next trend is, so we can always be ahead. And so David Sachs is not just the crypto czar, but also artificial intelligence as well. And I heard Ranking Member Maxine Waters talking about this in December, and she's going to have her own legislation coming out around this topic. Understanding what the best parts of blockchain, the best parts of artificial intelligence come together with DAI. This is something that we need to lean into and learn more about as well. I'll be talking about this. Thanks, Amber. Go ahead to probably the last slide or some of the last slides. I'm engaging, Amber, I know that you were on a call or involved with some of the work that I've been doing with other professionals as well. Certainly the Digital Demystified book, but also, excuse me, the Web3 Ready Professional. So important. We have to figure this out. You don't have to know all the things about all the things, but we do have to get ready and then stay ready, of course. And so let's do that. Let's figure out how to vet crypto projects, what lawyers and advisors need to know about DAOs and DeFi and stable coins, how to talk to clients and stakeholders about digital asset regulation, how to position yourself to lead. This is a moment that requires leadership. Full stop. And that's why we gotta show some love to Amber and my colleagues here tonight, because that is exactly what we're doing. I'm going to turn it back to you, Attorney Amber Smith, but that's where we are. It's not spectating moment. It's not, this is strategizing. This is community. This is collaboration. This is level up and get very serious.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Tanya, giving us this opportunity to, really envision the future, right? Not just within the legal profession, because again, this conversation was really targeting our colleagues, right? This was also a call to action for lawyers to come together to have these difficult conversations across practice areas, but those who are innovating in their own respective industries, right? And recognizing that Web3 is disrupting every single industry. AI, crypto, all these different things are changing the way we do business. And you are absolutely a source that I rely on to stay Web3 ready. And I hope that everyone else does as well. Hopefully you all were able to take a shot of that QR code on there to stay in touch with Professor Evans, but we will definitely be circulating this information. She has put her, let's go ahead and put that up on the screen. Please connect with her at Professor Tanya Evans or proftanyaevans.com. All right. And so with that said, I want to be mindful of you all's time. I'm looking at it. Folks are still sticking around, but I know people have to hop off. And so I'm just going to show a slide or two just to help you all. One, make sure that you're staying in touch with the law office of Ambur C. Smith, but then all of our colleagues, but also giving us some feedback about what happened. So thank you so much, Tanya. I'm going to drop you off the stage. If y'all still want to stick around, I know we got a couple questions, but obviously we need a part 2. That's what it's giving. It's giving we're going to have to do a part 2. So that is what I'm looking forward to doing. Let's see. Let's go ahead and remove. All right, perfect. So thank you all so much. Those who stuck around for the entire 2 hours or hopped in when you could. Of course, this isn't a live event, but as we mentioned, it will be recorded and we want you all to have access. Why? Because it's about empowerment. It's about being action-oriented, right? And innovative and creative in a time period that challenges us to do the opposite, right? To operate with fear and a scarcity mindset. But that's not something that I promote here at the Law Office of Attorney Ambur C. Smith. It's not something that my clients who are creative startups and nonprofits across industries. And so if that sounds like you and you're looking for support, please feel free to connect with me and my firm using the information on the screen. But of course, I've connected y'all with a whole bunch of other lawyers today, right? And some of which specialize in some of the same things. But of course, you can imagine we find ways to collaborate. So if you choose to work with me, you might end up working with them anyway. So, but feel free to see us all as a resource. I think in this environment, we're challenged to be competitive. I feel like this is something I heard I've heard Tanya say on many occasions, right, this idea that this is not a time to be competitive, it's time to be collaborative, right? And so this town hall was birthed out of an idea that we are stronger together, right? In this moment, we're being challenged to be divided and conquered ultimately. And again, this is a nonpartisan conversation, and I'm sure folks on both sides of the aisle can agree with that assessment and the assessment that my colleagues have given us throughout this evening. And so I just want to thank you all so much. Again, everyone who came to provide insight to our audience, but also everybody who participated. Jeremy saying, we need part 2. Okay, we definitely need part 2 and 3 and 4, but this was supposed to help y'all unpack those first 100 days. It was so much, it took more than 2 hours, but you can imagine the next 100 days and the 100 days after that are going to come with their fair share of challenges. But I'm confident that we have what it takes. So for the folks that are still here, if y'all want to come on camera, we'd love to bring y'all up so we could just have this one moment of seeing everybody on here. Okay, we got all these lovely faces, lovely folks. I don't know, Keisha, you still around? It has been just, just a wonderful opportunity. These are folks that I respect who've been doing this a lot longer than me, right? They said they've been new to, they're not new to this. They are true to this, truly. And, and this is really just an opportunity, one, to, again, share my platform and the platform that you all have allowed me to create, right? Whether you're a follower on LinkedIn, whether you're a follower on Facebook or Instagram, whether you're subscribed to the website or what have you, or you just somebody that I've connected with over the years. This was just really an opportunity for me to give back to the community that I think has given so much to me. And so thank you all again. Thank you to everybody on screen. I don't want to take up any more of y'all time. So we're going to if we have more questions, I'll make sure to get that to y'all. So maybe we can, again, add that to the agenda for the next time. And with that said, I'm going to put the survey on there for a little while longer, but thank you all so much. This has truly exceeded my expectations. Again, the Law Office of Ambur C. Smith. We are a business and intellectual property firm serving clients across industries, creative startups, nonprofits, helping to protect their billion-dollar ideas and prepare for success. So hopefully y'all feel more confident about doing that after today. Any final remarks from some of my speakers? Anybody got anything else to say?
We leave it in your capable hands, Counselor.
Thanks, Ambur.
We love it. We love it. Thank y'all so much. I guess we're going to collectively drop the mic at that point. Thank you to our audience. You all are amazing. Ashley says she's feeling encouraged and resourced. Again, an amazing client of mine who is also my amazing sister, a fabulous designer, executive producer at Equator Productions, doing brilliant work across the entertainment and fashion industries, and another inspiration for tonight's event. So thank you, Ashley, for that feedback. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Nina, in the chat, another amazing resource who's always sharing funding opportunities. I think Chris gave her a shout out in the chat. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm just gonna be here singing folks' praises until y'all log off. So maybe we'll give it a couple seconds. But thank you all so much for this. For being a part of this. The town hall was really about everyone. All right, folks, I think with that said, hopefully y'all took a picture of the QR code. Y'all got the QR code? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to end the stream. And for those who are watching the recording, stay in touch. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ambur.
Bye-bye.